Let's do this. The Cult of Hockey podcast by the faithful and for the faithful. I'm David Staples of the Edmonton Journal, and I'm here today with Bruce McCurdy. Hey, Bruce.
Hey David, how are you doing today?
Good, good, good. I was out skating this morning, so
Skating, eh?
always a good day when you start off. It is one of the best exercises, just public skating, you can engage in. It's good for your balance, good for your strength, and good for your cardiovascular. So if you got a rink in your neighborhood, get out there. Although then everyone will get out there and the rinks will be too crowded, but that's okay too. All right. Bruce, we will be talking today on the podcast about the Oilers prospects. That's the main thing we have up in the next month, and we're moving on. We're moving on to cover the prospects. Can you hear me?
I can. David, I got to run grab something. You just carry on for
Okay.
a minute. Sorry.
Sure thing. We will be talking about the Connor McDavid's place in history, hockey history, and how there is one Toronto Maple Leaf who, so far at least, has had a greater career than Connor McDavid in terms of career value, at least according to some work that I did. That player is not Austin Matthews, but we'll get into who he is momentarily. We will talk about a key difference between the Las Vegas Golden Knights and the Edmonton Oilers. Bruce did a post on that. But we'll start off the podcast with a wee bit of news. The Oilers have brought in a player on a PTO, Brandon Sutter, from the famous Sutter family. He is one of their sons. Who's his dad, Bruce?
Oh, Brandon Sutter. Is it Brent?
We don't know.
There's so many Sutters and sons of Sutters and cousins. And
Brandon Sutter's father. Anyway, he's 34. He had a fairly decent career as a checking center with a number of teams. The Vancouver Canucks being his last, or not his, he was good. He was okay in Vancouver. Where else was he, Bruce? Philadelphia?
His father is Brent Sutter. His uncles are Brian, Darrell, Dwayne, Rich, and Ron. His cousins are Sean, Brett, Brody, Luke, and Riley. And his brother is Merrick.
So his dad's Brent, who was, I think,
the Islanders,
the best of the Sutters, right?
Yeah,
like and Brian Sutter was a really, really good hockey player too. Yeah. But Brent was the best player. He was the only probably Team Canada quality Sutter, and he did play on Team Canada, I think, in 87?
84.
84?
84, yeah. When Trottier defected to play for the U.S., they just brought in the Islanders' second-line center, Brent Sutter, and he was really good in that Canada Cup.
Yeah, by 84, he actually might have been a better player than Brian Trottier, truth be told. Trottier was slowing down by then, and Sutter was taking off as a two-way hockey player.
He had a 100-point season right after that, as I recall. It was the Canada Cup was his running start at his best season.
So Brandon Sutter is 6'3", about 200 pounds. He went through Red Deer, as a lot of the Sutters have done. He started out with Carolina, played in Pittsburgh, and then Vancouver. And his best year in Pittsburgh was 2014-15, when he scored 21 goals. He really hasn't been a regular, like a solid regular player since 2017-18. And he hasn't even played the last couple of years as the result of long COVID. And as we know, COVID is a virus that can really mess with different systems in the body. And it hits some people really hard. And he's one of them. I understand Jonathan Taves is too. So he has been out. He's been unable to, his career was winding down anyway, if I'm completely honest. In 2021, he had 12 points in 43 games for Vancouver. He was -9. I mean, he was still on a big contract then, so he would have hung around, but he was ineffective, fairly ineffective that year before he got long COVID. And he had been fairly ineffective mainly with injury for a couple seasons. Injury had taken a lot out of him, as it does with most hockey players, especially those who play a grinding style. So, Bruce, the chances, it strikes me, Well, give me a percentage chance that he makes the Oilers, and then that he's a regular on the Oilers by the playoffs. What would you say? Those two things. What odds
I'd put it at 10% tops.
that he'd make the Oilers?
Yeah. Yeah, to me, it's a long shot unless somehow he's enjoyed some sort of physical comeback, because I mean he was going through the sort of the aging span when he was 29, 30, 31, scored 4, 8, 9 goals his last 3 years, mind you. None of them in anything close to 80 games. I mean, it's the other problem, right? Like he's barely played games in that time, and then he got long COVID, and he's been basically off the ice for 2 years. And I guess he wants to give it a try, and he found a team that will let him give it a try. And unless he's Kirill Tulipov, and sets about injuring his own teammates in the Joey Moss Cup. I don't see a lot of harm in it. I think they're playing 8 preseason games in 13 days. They have league rules about the number of so-called veterans that must be in the lineup for every preseason game, because I have to justify the ridiculous cost of preseason tickets, which at least I see now is coming down compared to regular season. But so guys like him, often these PTOs are the guys that are flying to Winnipeg, for that one day hated road trip that players take, and they need veterans in that game too. And the veterans tend to be the PTO guys and the guys at the very bottom that are just scrambling for any chance they can get, and they'll happily go to Winnipeg to get that chance. And in recent years, we've seen PTOs like Colton Sevier, and even Jake Vertanen, how much as I thought that was a terrible public relations move, he did play a few games and satisfy that requirement. Well, that's one of the purposes of those guys, is they help the team through that. And all the Winnipeg fans complain they're not getting to see McDavid and Draisaitl and so on, can at least say, well, at least we got to see Brandon Sutter playing tonight. So
it'll be a much bigger moment for Brandon Sutter than it will be for him. Yeah. So we don't actually know the extent of his illness, right? So we don't know what he's coming back from and how low he got. But 4 months ago, he gave an interview, fairly extensive interview. And he sounded at that point that he was, as he put it, feeling better, starting to feel normal again.
Right.
But there's a big gap between starting to feel normal and being ready to play in the NHL, and especially for a 34-year-old forward who couldn't afford to lose a step. So yeah, I'm going to put it at, I think 10% is about right that he makes the team, and then 5% that he still in the lineup by the playoffs and is a useful competitor. This does seem like a favor to the player. Maybe you can use it as a springboard to get a contract in Europe, or maybe just a minor league contract in Bakersfield. Like if he shows enough that he could be like a help out down there. I don't know if they need a center. They already have like Malone, don't they, and McKegg. So they're kind of heavy in that kind of veteran center aspect already. But yeah, good luck to him. And he, for years he was mentioned as a player of interest for the Oilers.
Yeah.
But it does seem like one of those ones that it's kind of come and gone for him as a player, Bruce. And I just want to say, like, your Kirill Tulipov, is it Tulipov?
Yeah.
That reference is kind of like, I wouldn't want to be your wife in an argument, because you remember every past.
He's a legend. Kirill Tulipov is a legend. He's the guy who put out Ben Eager.
But who remembers that, Bruce? Nobody remembers. Like,
lots of people remember Tulipov. You'd be surprised.
I remember
he was a legend. He put out Ben Eager in the Joey Moss Cup with a vicious boarding check. And then we have 2 pictures of file of Tulipov, and both of them involve him hitting Taylor Hall. One time when Hall was on his own team, and he took a run at the guy on the other team and creamed Hall. And then the other one was obviously from the same Joey Moss Cup where they're both wearing Oilers sweaters, but one's blue and one's white. And at least he's hitting the guy supposedly on the other team. Well, it was Taylor Hall, top Oiler at the time, which was 2011, I think it was. Yeah, that was the year they got eager. And he was just chaos, and he was
Well,
like
that's all he had.
anti-Tervainen, only dangerous.
Yeah, I remember when Antti Tervainen hit that
Zamboni.
Zamboni and knocked it back. Now, but I'm just saying, Bruce, in an argument, your wife must just dread it because you're going to bring up, you remember things like 20, 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah.
And does she have the same kind of memory for your?
No, what? Sometimes I forget to eat lunch, right? So she's got her avenues of attack, and we rarely debate, who was the top player in the original six era or something like that, where I might actually have an edge. So
but she doesn't. It's not in your wheelhouse. Your arguments, then it's she's fighting on her territory.
Yeah.
You're the invading force coming off the beach into the machine gun nest. Okay, I got it. All right, like all husbands. No, that's a cliche.
Kirill Tulipov injuring Ben Eager was sort of from the classic from the Decade of Darkness. Some incidents that include Taylor Hall getting his face stepped on by Corey Power play, and by Nail Yakupov getting hauled down by the linesman and getting injured. Like there's a whole bunch of these sort of weird stories that happened that wound up with guys getting hurt out of just sort of weird stuff, right? Inter-squad games, pre-game warm-ups.
Did Taylor Hall
clumsy linesman? Come on.
Did Taylor Hall wipe out in front of Potter? Is that how that happened?
I think he got tripped by Smead. And then Potter, he went down in front of him, no helmet on. Potter tried to jump over him, but didn't, and stepped right on his face. It was gross and dangerous and scary. And so Oilers, it was just unreal. So
you look at those Oilers rosters from then, and you can see why they might have brought in Kirill Tulipov. They were so desperate for anyone who could do anything.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so there's an expectation the Oilers will bring in 2 or 3, 4 players on PTO, probably as you say for that big night in Winnipeg.
Yeah,
a Winnipeg road trip. They're going to bring in some guys on PTOs, probably a D man. You can expect that. So others can stay home. All right, moving on, Bruce. We talked briefly about the what I called the 14% solution on our last podcast for the Oilers. Now that they have Jeff Jackson as their GM, which and not their GM, I'm jumping ahead of myself here, but as their CEO, Kurt Levins in his post highlighted the truth of that matter. That was a brilliant move by Daryl Cates. Daryl Cates has taken a lot of heat in Edmonton, probably some of it justified, depending on your feelings about public subsidies for essentially what becomes a private arena. And fair enough, that's completely fair. And then he took a lot of heat for the first 10 years of the Decade of Darkness, which he also deserved to some extent, even though he was putting a lot of money and effort into it.
Mm-hmm.
There's working hard, and there's working smart, and he was not working smart. They hired the wrong people to lead the team, essentially.
Yeah.
It took him a long time to get it right. But Bruce, and as Kurt's post made clear, I just think this really was a brilliant move by Cates. It's amazing in a way that another team hadn't hired him, especially a team that wanted to sign McDavid. Now, maybe Jackson wouldn't have gone to any other team but Edmonton. Maybe that's what it took to get him to leap into NHL management. But I just want to put a exclamation mark on that hiring. I do think, for someone who checks all those boxes that a hockey executive, other than being Connor McDavid's agent, if he hadn't been Connor McDavid's agent, this would have been a really great signing. But because of that, it's just like, this is a slam dunk. And you can't, it's still not sure that McDavid will resign here. I know that, but man. So I was looking at his contract, and I think that there's a chance he'll do what Crosby did and sign for a similar amount as he's making now, which is $12.5 million a year. I think Leon's going to want a big raise because he's been underpaid compared to his value. I mean, so is McDavid. McDavid should have been getting maximum contract. But I think it's funny, there's been a lot of focus on how players at the bottom end of the lineup are squeezed and they can only make the minimum amount. But really, the players giving up the most money, getting squeezed the most in terms of pure dollar amount, are the players at the very top end who aren't getting paid anywhere near, like they're all like the superstars really do sell the tickets. They really do drive sales. And Connor McDavid is the reason you can charge as much as in Edmonton as you can for a ticket. So he should be earning the maximum, and he's going to take some kind of, assuredly, he will take some kind of haircut in a way that other players don't. Nurse and Nugent Hopkins and Kane, in theory, they might have got more in some other place, but they all got pretty good contracts. It's the guy at the top end who really has to suck it up, actually, for everybody else and to help the team compete. And the interesting thing is Crosby, Malkin did that. Bruce, if both McDavid and Draisaitl do that and sign for $12.5 million a year, essentially the same amount of money, which is what Malkin and Crosby did for the vast majority of their careers in Pittsburgh, that'll mean $10 million in extra cap space, essentially, each year for the Edmonton Oilers to use on other players. Right now it's $2.5 million a year from McDavid that he could have got, that they can use on other players because he didn't get greedy, so to speak. It could be on the next contract. It could even be more than that.
Oh,
because the cap's going up, and he might just decide. And again, I have no opinion on what he should do. Just thinking about looking at history and thinking about what might happen. It might be as much as $10 million in cap space, $5 million each. Because Draisaitl, I also think, could get 20%. If he wanted to maximize his contract and he went as a UFA, I think Leon could get a 20% contract, 20% of the cap, at least on a short-term deal. He could sign for like 3 years in some city for the 20% amount. I have zero doubt about that.
I do, only because we haven't yet seen any player sign to the maximum amount. But I don't doubt that he could, achieve a very, very high, top 3 in the league type salary. So
we haven't seen a player with that kind of value. Have we? Maybe Karlsson, but even then, wasn't Karlsson a little bit damaged goods when he hit the market? There was some uncertainty about him when he signed that $11.5 million contract per year. I think, let me just Google that and see.
Yeah, if you're talking about Mark Karlsson's been.
I'm talking about other players who have hit the market in the NHL.
Right. Anyway, so not guys who were re-signed by their own team like McKinnon, but talking about guys.
Some of these top end guys are just taking it for their team. They really are.
Were in the case of McKinnon.
Yeah, Karlsson had stepped back a bit as a player from his very peak season. He hadn't been that injured yet, but he was minus 25 plus minus in the year that he signed his new contract. And he had 62 points in 71 games. But Erik Karlsson is obviously such a fantastic hockey player.
Give or take Matt Cook stomping on his Achilles heel. But,
yeah. These guys.
That was gross. Anyway, there's yet to be a case of a team either internally to our own player or externally paying the 20%.
Indeed.
And
that's true.
I don't see it's happening. If it doesn't happen with McDavid, then who the hell will it happen for? And maybe some other team that's desperate to contend, but some team with $20 million in cap space, chances are good they're not that close. And someone like Leon might say, well, geez, do I want to take 20 million to go and play in Anaheim, or do I want to take 14 to play in Edmonton, or whatever it works out to be? So
what do you think they'll sign for, Bruce, if you had to guess?
I think they'll both get significant raises, and I think McDavid will be north of 15, and Leon will be where McDavid was or thereabouts. So I'm thinking 28 mil for the two of them, somewhere in that range.
I'm going to go with my 12.5 each. I think that they're both going to take, I think that they're, at this point, they've made a lot of money, and they're both going to, Draisaitl will get a big raise, and they're both going to really suck it up and take less of a cap hit so they can be on a team which is more able to compete for the Stanley Cup. That is my prediction. All right. Bruce, one of the things that I think about, I don't know why, maybe because I read so much Bill James as a kid, is he was kind of obsessed with ranking players on an all-time list.
Mm-hmm.
And he did it in baseball. The statistics are so fantastic in terms of rating offensive, batting. You can really see who was the best hitter, and there's not a whole lot of debate about offensive play, similar to the NHL, I guess. But so he had an interesting take on it, though. He didn't like when modern writers would look back and rate players based on the current modern day narratives about certain players, because he thought those were distorted and inaccurate often. And what he liked to do is go back and look at what people thought of them at the time, and really what people thought of them as reflected in MVP votes. So I read his historical baseball abstract, which is a fantastic book. If you're interested in analytics, any kind of analytics, it's one of the books you should read. And in that book, he detailed his rankings of players. And so what I did based on that is I just thought, okay, we're ranking and rating the best of players. Let's just look at who won the MVP awards year after year and who won the MVP in the playoffs, the Conn Smythe. And based on who wins those awards, let's just make a list of who, essentially 3 points if you won the MVP award, 3 points if you won the Conn Smythe award. I gave them equal weight because I do think they're of equal value. And then I gave essentially 2 points for the player who finished second in the Hart Trophy voting, MVP voting, and then 1 point for the position players, best position player. So 3 for the top, 2 for the second, and then I filled out the roster with another winger, or if it's 2 wingers sometimes if a defenseman had won, and then 2 defensemen and a goalie, and they all got 1 point based on the MVP voting. Right. So that's how it worked.
Almost like they'd probably closely match the All-Star.
They do, but they're not exact because there's sometimes some weirdness. Mm-hmm. So right now, Bruce, Connor McDavid so for career value and handing out points that way, Connor McDavid ranks. He's had the 15th highest career value of any player in the NHL. He's the 15th best player who's ever played the game according to this system of analysis. That's not that bad. The only other modern players in the top 50 right now, Sidney Crosby, who's 5th overall all time. Mm-hmm. He's got 20 points. The leader, put that in perspective, the leader, Wayne Gretzky, has 37 points, career points. Gordie Howe has 29, number 2. Bobby Orr in 3, 25. Mario Lemieux, 21. Sidney Crosby and Nicklas Lidstrom, 20 each. Because defensemen no longer win the Hart Trophy, in the start after 1940, they just stopped winning the Hart Trophy for some reason. Because I think they thought, the best defenseman, the Norris Trophy. So I started to give the best defenseman every year, instead of 1 point, would give them 2. I would give them second place automatically, since they were
Norris
kind of
trophy
to whoever won the Norris.
Yeah.
So that's why Lidstrom he won a lot of Norris trophies. He's got 20 points. Jean Beliveau, 19. Eddie Shore, 19. Maurice Richard, 16 points. Ray Bourque, 16. Howie Morenz, 15 points. Doug Harvey, 15 points. Alex Ovechkin, 14. Ted Kennedy, the only Toronto Maple Leaf ahead of Connor McDavid. Sorry, Leaf fans, it's not Austin Matthews. 14 points for Ted Kennedy and 13 for McDavid. Erik Karlsson is actually 24th on the list, which is, he has been a remarkable player, and I think Pittsburgh might have made quite a good acquisition here in the short term. The only other player still playing in the top 50, I think that's it, actually. Cale Makar ranks 59th, Bruce. He's got 6 points already. Cale Makar may move up into the top 20, maybe into the top 10 before it's all over. He looks like he's going to make some moves. So,
yeah, well, that's a very, very impressive list, David. When you just look at the names and not the numbers or how it was derived. Gretzky, Howe, Orr, Lemieux, Crosby. I mean, what's there to argue with, really? Lidstrom, Beliveau, Shore, Richard, Bourque. I mean, these are all-time greats of the game spread across many eras. And then, of course, our third group, Marin's, Harvey, Ovechkin, Kennedy, and McDavid, with Kennedy being the surprise. And I think because he was awarded, in retrospect, 3 virtual Conn Smythes. And of course, that was not done by reporters of the day, but subsequent reporters.
Kind of hockey historians.
Yeah. And he got the 1 MVP right at the end of his career when it was almost a career achievement award because Toronto finished last and he won the MVP in 1955. And but I mean, these are just, you can quibble with this case or that, and I would say the goalies maybe are a little underrepresented because they don't win MVPs either, but
they do now and then, like Jose
once
Theodore.
In a while. Yeah, once in a while for sure.
Carey
More
Price.
often than D-men do.
Carey, yeah, they have. You're right, Bruce, but they are Dominic Hasek, Jose Theodore, Carey Price.
I'd be tempted to add a second point for Vezina Trophy winners, but of course the Vezina Trophy changed its actual standards in 1981, so that would introduce another headache. So
maybe the first All-Star team goalie, you could do that. You might consider that as like the best goalie because the Vezina has changed its meaning.
Then the great Stony Plain stopper Glenn Hall would be way higher on this list anyway.
Yeah,
he won
that's
a lot
not
of
a bad
awards.
suggestion, Bruce. I was thinking
that
a lot of
too. Awards. He's got 6 points here, and I'm thinking, I think he's a little higher than that. But like I say, it's quibbling. Some would say Mark Messier only 28th. How can that be? But he plays second fiddle for a big chunk of his career, right? I mean, I'm sure Malkin's not super high on this list either, right?
No, he's on the list, but
he's on it. Yeah,
high.
He won MVP. And of course, Messier won too. And yeah, just. But names all across the eras. Nels Stewart, Old Poison. Nels Stewart, loved his nickname. Right?
Charlie that was Conacher. His nickname. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Charlie Conacher. He retired as the NHL's all-time leading goal scorer, 324, and he was eventually passed by Maurice Richard. Was eventually passed by Gordie Howe, who was eventually passed by Wayne Gretzky. So Nels Stewart is on that list of guys who once led this is a super scorer who doesn't get a lot of, but by your method, there's his name, 29th on the list, tied with Phil Esposito, for goodness sake, another second fiddle. And, it's, there's no imposters in here. Let's put it that way. These are great players from across the full 106-year now history of NHL.
The highest goalie is Patrick Roy at 16th.
All those Conn Smythes, eh?
All those Conn Smythe trophies. So that's what pushed him up there. You're right. Like that's probably not a bad suggestion in terms of thinking of a way to improve the list, is to try to, give the goalies a little bit more due. There's a lot of goalies on the list, but they're down usually.
They have 6 and 8 points. Yeah.
The strength of the list, I think it does represent fairly each era. It elevates players who are long forgotten by most fans. Like if you said to most fans, that Jack Dara was a hell of a player, Was he Blackjack there? Like no one would even. I don't like. I hardly know who he played for or what he did. And
He was a
Earl
senator.
Siebert, like whoever who
Yeah,
knows Earl Siebert?
early,
Bill
early.
Bill is it Bill Cowley?
Bill Cowley, yeah.
Yeah,
It
Bill
was his
Cowley.
record that Gretzky broke. Cowley had 71 points in 36 games for 1.97 points per game. And when Gretzky got past 160 in 1980-81, he got to over 2 points a game, the first guy to do it. But it was Bill Cowley's record that he broke.
Yeah, I I like this list because it just mixes all these great names together, right? The great names of old, and makes them seem a little fresh again, and then
Mm-hmm.
also puts into context McDavid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He's right behind Ovechkin and Kennedy, and he's right ahead. He's tied with Bill Kelly, Red Kelly, and Guy Lafleur. He's already had as great a career value as Guy Lafleur. Be nice to get us a couple Stanley Cups in there.
Or Red Kelly. Wow.
Or Red Kelly, fantastic
He had
players.
2 careers. One as a Norris Trophy class defenseman with Detroit, and one as a Frank Selke class center with Toronto.
And he's just ahead.
He won 8 cups too. Like you get no credit for cups here at all, right?
I don't because I mean, for one thing, like if you advance to the second round now and win the second round, you've gotten by what 7 teams to get there. 8, 7. You've gotten by 7.
It would punish modern players. You're right.
That's the same as winning the Stanley Cup in the days of Ted Kennedy. Now Ted Kennedy's team, I think they won 5 Stanley Cups.
7 years.
So like people wondering why is Ted Kennedy, like who is Ted Kennedy first of all, and why is he on the list? Well, he was the best player on a Toronto Maple Leaf team that won 5 Stanley Cups in I think 7 years. So he was the outstanding playoff competitor of his time, and it wasn't close. He was just a fantastic 2-way hockey player and the heart and soul of one of the best teams that ever was. One of probably the most underrated. Like it's funny they're underrated from Toronto. Like who's ever heard of that team? But he was the man.
I read a few books about that team, so I have. But yeah, they won 42, 45, 47, 48, 49, and then 51. So 6 in 10 years. And the only guy that might even come close to Kennedy for reputation at the time as a great playoff performer would be the great Turk Broda, netminder. That was widely recognized as a clutch stopper, as happens with goalies who win cups.
Was Bill Spunska on that team?
Now that I couldn't tell you for sure.
Oh, you didn't? I got you, Bruce.
Bill
You didn't get
Spunska.
that. You didn't get that. That's one of the few old-time hockey references. He's not a real player. He is the protagonist of Scott Young's Scrubs on Skates.
Okay, I got the book on my shelf. I read it many, many years ago. Forgot his name though.
And
I guess he's no Bronk Burnett.
It was actually a series. The first one it was written by Scott Young, who is singer-songwriter Neil Young's father. Scott Young was a tremendous writer for the.
He's my idol as a writer. I read his book. I read his Scott Young sports stories and Scott Young, The Leafs I Knew, over and over again as a kid, and was one of the things that got me into writing about hockey in particular.
I don't think I've ever read The Leafs I Knew. I met Scott Young.
Mm-hmm.
He wrote a book of short stories about Christmas.
Oh yeah,
they were very well done, and he did a little book, and he went on an author's tour, and I think in the late 1990s, I interviewed him about that book. And the interesting thing about the book is the dedication. It's for Neil, and this was written. No, I think actually the dedication of Scrubs on Skates or Boy on Defense, which is the other book in that series. And then there's that Old Gang of Mine, which was written later anyway. But the dedication of Boy on Defense, I think, is for Neil and Scott Young's other son, who I can't remember his name. And those are like if you want to get maybe they'd seem kind of dated for a modern kid, but those are really great hockey books. They're about this, I think, a Polish immigrant, who tries to break into his high school hockey team. And about his rise through hockey. And the third book in the series, that Old Gang of Mine, is written like 20 years later by the author, and it's about 10 years later in the lives of the characters, and they get together to play for the Canadian national team. So, are you looking for Scrubs on Skates?
Yeah, I am.
I have a very old volume of that, I think, somewhere around the house as well.
Yeah, it's somewhere down in the must be elsewhere in the house. I just recently found a copy in a used bookstore and grabbed it, intending to read it, but I haven't yet.
I got to get that Leafs book by Scott Young. See if what's it called? The Leafs I Knew.
The Leafs I Knew. And it's a diary style book it's just his selected columns, hockey columns.
Oh yeah.
Snippets columns that he wrote between 1958 to spring of 1963, which is exactly when I started watching. So he gave sort of and I was a Leafs fan, he gave sort of the prior 5 years from the arrival of Johnny Bauer and, the Punch Imlach arrival in Toronto in the beginning. So he gives a really great backdrop for that sort of 10-year run of that club. And the second half of it, I experienced myself as a fan. So it was like a perfect segue. And he writes so well, and he so well captures, some of the guts of the game. There's things that Scott Young wrote in 1959. That's true. And it's true today. Like, remember, he was writing about a big hit one time, and his moral of the story was that the player who skates with his head down will soon wind up with no head at all in this league. And I'm not sure that's changed really all that much. You skate with your head down. It's the end
Still
could be
some
near.
Wicked hits. Recently, there was one of the Toronto Maple Leafs camp. I think the Maple Leafs had Kirill Tulipov at their training camp that day.
Yeah, that was a Tulipov.
That was a very Tulipov kind of moment, wasn't it?
It was, yes.
Who got hit?
Their top draft choice from last year got hammered. Finnish kid got hammered by this big tough scrub on skates.
Alrighty. Moving on. Bruce, we're writing our prospect series. And you've written the first post. I thought the most interesting thing from your post was just the massive amount of turnover. There's two things that stand out. Of course, the Oilers, because of trades and trading draft picks and trading players who have been drafted, are really short on prospects right now. As short as we've been in
the whole time we've been doing this.
Yeah,
they're short on prospects. This short.
Why don't you go down the list and just tell us who's off the list?
Yeah, well, this was last year's list. 2022, we had 31 prospects at that time, which was 4 fewer than the year before because Holland had traded a bunch of draft picks at that time. Well, last year we also graduated a bunch of players. Last year there was 4 first-round picks in the top 5, and this year 3 of them are gone. 2 of them are basically promoted to the NHL, at least by our standards. They're no longer rookies. That would be Broberg and Holloway, who have, both played 50 games last year. And then the third first-round pick who's gone is Reed Schaefer, who was included in the Matthias Ekholm trade. So there's only one left. In fact, there's only one player left from the top 7 of last year. Broberg graduated, Holloway graduated, Skinner, our number 3, graduated to the NHL, and he had a very strong season. He was the only one of these guys who actually played the entire year in the NHL, the ones who graduated. The others are still working their way in. Xavier Bourgault still here. Ray Schaefer traded for Ekholm. Marcus Niemelainen is played over 20 games for the second straight year, so he's no longer a rookie. Dmitry Samorukov traded for Klim Kostin, who helped the team last year, but Samorukov is gone. Vincent Desharnais graduated to the NHL from number 10. Michael Kesselring from 13 was traded for Nick Bjugstad. So here they've got guys helping the team directly that got promoted to the NHL, and they have 3 players that they picked up in trades over the course of the season that all helped the team down the stretch and in the playoffs. Ekholm, Kostin, and Bjugstad. So they're basically using the same source, not only for supply young players, but they're culling them out to bring in more experienced players. So they're sort of double tapping, so to speak, the farm system to speed up the process as much as possible. Still develop the guys at a reasonable rate, but what's new is this trading out prospects for other players. It used to be once they got a prospect, he stayed in the system for a while until they basically let the guy go. And especially if he was a first round pick, he would stay in the system for a long while. I mean, last year, until the Puljujarvi trade, Oilers had their last 10 first round draft picks all under contract. So that changed in a big way with Puljujarvi traded, Yamamoto traded, Schaefer traded, and the 2023 number one traded before it was ever selected. And so the list has been thinned out in that way. And between the graduations and the trades, or as I call them, the headline promotions and deals, their list is way thinned out, and we have a lot of guys. Like, I'm not going to reveal who's number one or any of that stuff, but there's a whole bunch of guys that like moved up 5 or 7 spots. And well, that's promising. He went from number 14 to number 6 or whatever. Well, that's because 8 guys in front of him got disappeared off of the list, and maybe he's just sort of making regular progress. But we've got a few that sort of, wow, did he ever soar this year? And I think it's just because of the list above is relatively vacant, so you would expect those guys to move up. Then there was a sad case of Noah Philp, who retired when he was looking like a real strong prospect with a good chance to make the Oilers, I think, even this season. And other than that, a couple guys way down at the bottom of the list just sort of dispensed with it. Of the guys that they lost, 6 were in the top 7 and 9 were in the top 16. And so there's wide open spaces at the top of the list, and in various ways. And also they traded enough draft choices. They traded 4 draft choices last year. They only added 3 guys through the draft, not 7. So the replenishment of these vacancies is not happening at the rate, because Holland is, I got to say it, all in, trading picks, trading prospects, trading to maximize his team in the short run, moving guys out for salary retention. Like, there's a lot of moving pieces, and it seems to me that the large majority of them are focused on the team in the here and now and not down the road. And the prospect system's shriveling up a little bit, and you wrote an article a while back how one of the Byron Bader had them ranked 28th out of 32, and it's just the other end of the cycle, right? When you're building a team, you get a zillion draft picks and prospects, and it all looks great, but you're 5 years away from being any good in the NHL. I'd rather be where the Oilers are right now.
I noticed one interesting fact that I didn't know at all from it was the Oilers traded number 23rd overall prospect Philip Engras for Garrett Van Wy.
Garrett Van Wy, oh why?
Why? That's a name I had never heard.
I was going to make a joke about that. Yeah, I know. This was a minor league deal, and I don't know what's happened to Garrett Van Wy, but he is not under an NHL contract,
he's an ECHL player.
We rate guys, and this is an important clarification for our project. We rate guys who are under NHL class contracts or on the reserve list, drafted but not yet signed, and we do not rate guys on AHL contracts, even though there may emerge 1 or 2 guys from the AHL, as indeed we saw last year with Vincent Desharnais and James Hamblin finding time in the NHL, who originally were on AHL contracts. So it can happen, but I thought it would be a slippery slope to start analyzing 15 guys on AHL contracts. And one thing that has happened under Holland is there are way more AHL contracts and relatively fewer Oiler players placed in the system, and I guess I would have to back that up by doing some actual analysis, but I'm pretty sure that would be the case.
I was thinking about James Hamblin he was number 12 last year. It's funny, like, even though he played some games with the Oilers this year, when people talk about 4th line center right now, you never hear his name mentioned. And I guess people just felt he was fairly, like, he didn't seem to take a step up, and he was fairly underwhelming with the Oilers when he was here. Like, he didn't really make a huge positive impression on people. But that's interesting. Bruce, so this year for our list, you voted, I voted, Kurt Levens voted, and we also, Jim Matheson, the Hall of Fame hockey writer at the Edmonton Journal, he voted, which is always fantastic. Thanks, Jim.
He's done for several years now.
He has.
At
I think
least
it's for the fifth year in a row. Yeah. And we also had our friend Ira Cooper, original Puzar, on Twitter. He voted. He voted in the list. Now I was hoping he would vote because he watched a lot of Bakersfield games this year, and he had a much better idea of the value of those players than I do. So I was glad that he participated. Bruce, did he correct something, like a fact that we had last week on the McLeod contract? What was that about? It was what was the information we had there? I think you were saying that when McLeod if he was awarded.
The 2 year, the 2 year thing, and I was wrong, and he corrected me that my understanding of the process is that whichever side asks for the arbitration, almost always the player, very occasionally is the team. The other side has the opportunity to stipulate whether it's a 1 or 2 year contract. And what wasn't clear to me when I got wrong was I thought the arbitrator awarded the amount, and then the team say, "Oh, we like that price, we'll do a 2nd year." But no, the team has to tell the arbitrator before they start, is this for 1 year, is this for 2? And then he takes that into account when trying to come up with a fair figure. So it's actually way fair. I just had it wrong.
Okay, so if McLeod,
CBA got me again.
You got CBA. We get CBA on a regular basis on this podcast, Bruce. We are not the experts that Ira is. Not to defend ourselves, but few people really, you can count on one hand the people who talk in public about hockey, who know all the ins and outs, or who know most of the ins and outs of the CBA. And Ira is, for an Oilers fan, he's kind of the go-to guy, I think. If he says something, and then there's the cap friendly dude. Yeah. He's really good.
Hart Levine from Puckpedia is a real strong.
It's not cap friendly. Yeah. It's Hart Levine from Puckpedia. Hart is excellent.
Yeah,
Hart's excellent. So and Ira actually will sometimes ask Hart. And Hart will answer, which is really nice.
As he will. He's outstanding.
Thank you, Ira. The input of those two guys. Mm-hmm. Yeah, both those guys are fantastic, sharing their knowledge. Ira is a lawyer. I don't know what Hart's background is, but he is a smart dude as well. So good for those guys helping us all out. And in talking to Ira about this, even as a lawyer, it's sometimes not clear to him reading the CBA what a particular answer is to a particular question. It's somewhat vague, and then comes down to precedent, like what's been decided. How's this played out in the real world. And that's when you know what the answer is. So there we go. All right. So we have this list, and Bruce, you did the first post, and you did a little bit of a brief summary of players. I think our list goes to 27 players this year. So between you went from 21 to 27. What do you say about this group of players, Bruce? In general, is there anyone? I thought one player stood out as a possible maybe. For the NHL, and that's that Capone kid who was drafted.
Capone is guy. I kind of like him the best out of these guys too. But he's a 7th round draft choice from 2023, so it takes a long stretch to get from there to the NHL. He reminds me. He's a right shot center with good reputation as a defensive player, and his points total showed it was a real surge last year. He went from 9 points to 29 points in his sophomore year, and I liked what I saw of him at Dev Camp. But he's just he's 5'11", 174, so he's not a huge man, and he's in there as one of these guys that could surprise, right? He's James Hamlin maybe, or maybe
that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, I'm trying to even think of the guy who went in the other Swedish or the other Finnish guy. Just let me catch his name here. I think it was 26.
Rasanen?
Yeah, Pelle Rasanen,
Pelle
who for
Rasanen.
years, he was a right shot defensive center playing U.S. college. He was progressing nicely. He looked like he might be, but he wound up going back to Finland, which I guess Matt Capoli won't be going back to Finland. But it's a player in that class, and every once in a while, one will
Become
work
Todd
out.
Marchant.
Hmm.
He was Todd Marchant, drafted in the 7th round of the
Hmm.
1993 draft. Just a little guy, but
Right.
just a fantastic skater. I don't know if Capone's skating is as good as Todd Marchant's, but what usually
I
defines this
highly
kind of
doubt it.
player, if they're going to make the NHL,
Hmm.
they've got to be three things for this kind of player, this class of player. They got to be a really great skater.
Hmm.
They've got to be fierce. They have to be
Tough.
fierce in competition,
Yeah.
and they have to be smart defensively. They've got to be ultra sound, ultra smart defensively. So this is Hamblin's. Like if Hamblin's going to move forward, for instance, he's he's a good skater, but from what I saw, he's got to up his ferocity. He's got to become a meaner hockey player, and he's got to be just completely sound on defense. It's got to be his whole focus on the ice is they are not scoring when I'm on the ice, and I'm going to be covering that guy like crazy. And if that happens, if all those three things come together, and there's no injury for the player, they have a chance of certainly having a long pro career in AHL in Europe, and just maybe becoming a Todd Marchant like player who managed to last 1,195 games in the NHL.
Sure.
So that's kind of top of class for this kind of player.
Yeah.
And it happens now and then, and it could
Yeah, it
happen to
does.
Capone, right?
It
It could
does.
happen to Hamblin. It's just
Hmm.
it's just for every 30 or 40 of that kind of player, only one
Hmm.
of them becomes
Yeah.
Todd
This guy
Marchand.
was already 20 when he got picked too, which generally
Yeah,
works against him. But in this case, they've got 2 more years of information on him, and what he did between year one and year two in college changed the equation enough. And I mean, seventh round pick. It's not like they invested a massive gamble in the guy. They just got his rights. And we'll see. But he is a player of interest. And of all the others, I mean, this maybe a little bit reflects our own bias, David, when we're voting. I know it does mine, of draft pedigree being one of the uh, parameters, especially guys that aren't even around yet. And here are the guys: Jeremiah Lindewall, drafted number 200; Maxime Denezkin, drafted 193; Thomas Mazura, 162; Nathaniel Day, 184; Matt Capone, 216; and Samuel Johnson, number 158. None of them signed, all on the reserve list. So all what our friend Lowtide calls distant bells, and maybe sometime down the road. I mean, most of these guys maybe won't even come over, you know, the European guys. And then number 21, the highest of the seven, Carl Berglund, who wasn't even drafted at all. But the reason that I rated him a little higher was that he's actually got a contract. He's going to be playing hockey right under the noses of, Keith Gretzky and the staff in Bakersfield. Presumably, he makes Bakersfield this year, and at least he's visible. I mean, what the heck is Thomas Mazura doing? Nobody knows, right? But at least we'll be able to keep tabs on Berglund, and so to me that put him just that little tiny margin ahead of these other long shots. But they're all, just by definition of how they came into the organization, drafted so late and not even signed yet, that they are very much long shots. So that's what they all have
yeah.
in common.
We're just reading tea leaves. What do the
Hmm.
Oilers think of them? Like, what do the NHL
Hmm.
scouts think of them? Well, you can tell by where they're drafted, and if they
Hmm.
get a contract, well, then they've thought well enough to give them an NHL contract. So we put weight in that. Like none of those
Right.
players we might have seen them at Dev Camp skate, like you might have this year, but other than that, we haven't even seen them skate.
Right.
So,
Right.
Bruce, one, I know you got to get going here, so I'm going to end what I have to say at least with Todd. One quick Todd Marchand story.
Hmm.
It was one of the underrated trades of all time for the Oilers. They traded Craig McTavish right at the end of his career to the New York Rangers, and they got Todd Marchand in return. So they traded one of the best third line centers ever in the NHL, and they got one of the best third line centers ever in the NHL in return. The funny thing is, Kevin Prendergast was the scout who recommended the trade, and for some reason, he had it in his he had it in his head that Todd Marchand was like 200 pounds,
Oh
and he
yeah.
was this bigger player that they were
Hmm.
trading for. And I don't, you know, it was a different era, right? Like they didn't have video on all the players. They were
Right.
often going by reference. You know, they
Hmm.
talked to their buddy, like who should we get? Like who's good in their system? Well, Todd Marchand. So when Kevin Prendergast recommended Todd Marchand to Glenn Sather, he was sold as this, you know, solid two-way player, 200-pound player. He he arrives in Edmonton, and of course he's 5'10", 175. And
Hmm.
everyone like Pendergast was just like, oh my God. But as soon as they
What have I done?
Marchand got on the ice and they could saw how he could skate, all was well. All was
Hmm.
well.
Yep.
Because
Yeah.
that
He
guy
could.
was as fast a skater as we've seen in Edmonton. Is that fair? He's in
He's
is he as
close. I
fast
think
as McDavid?
McDavid. I think
Yeah,
McDavid's
McDavid
probably
coffee is a
certainly
different kind
with
of
the puck.
yeah, with the
I'll take
puck.
McDavid with the puck. If I was to compare a modern Oiler to Marchand, it would be Ryan McLeod. And it's not that great of a comparison,
Not
but
as
it's, bottom six center, lots of speed. His speed is his greatest weapon. Certainly, he's a lot sort of lankier guy, but
yeah.
I would certainly take and find room for Todd Marchand on this team in a New York minute.
Boy, wouldn't he be good in his prime on this Oilers team? Man, if
Yeah,
Ryan McLeod can be as good as Todd Marchand, that'll
yeah,
be
yeah.
something.
Well, that's something to
Fingers
aspire
crossed.
to. Yeah.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Well, Bruce, any other thoughts? Anything you'd like to add? I'm going to continue on with the prospect series today, unless
Right.
Edmonton gets signed. But
Right. Yeah, and we're going to count down quickly to 15 because this year we actually there's just not enough depth to even write the 20 individual posts that we've done in the past. It's just the list is too short. I never actually mentioned that in my post, but you'll do 16 to 20. Then we'll get into the one at a time after that.
yeah,
And all else I've got is just a little fun project I did on the how teams were built. Stanley Cup champion teams were built, and I compared Vegas to the Oilers of 2023. See what and there was chalk and cheese. One was built through the draft, expansion draft.
Which Oilers did you compare to the Vegas team?
Well, first of all, the 23 Oilers,
Okay.
and then I went back and compared them to the 1985 Oilers, which was the only other
Yes.
team in NHL history to win the Stanley Cup in their sixth year in the league, which was, Vegas's huge accomplishment this year. Expansion team wins cup after just 6 years, and 85 Oilers, of course, that was their second cup. And that was, in fact, the team that was named the team of the century for the NHL in 2017. So this was a comparison that looked very good from an Oilers perspective to Vegas. And I did find lots of similarities. Like they did build through the expansion draft. They made a few trades around the expansion draft that proved to be really important for adding players. But the total difference was the draft, where 6-year-old Vegas Golden Knights have one player that they drafted themselves, Nicholas Hague, number 34
Good
overall.
player.
Good player, one player that they drafted themselves six
Wow.
years later, whereas the team of the century had Kevin Lowe, Mark Messier, Glenn Anderson, Paul Coffey, Yari Curry, Andy Moe, Grant Fuhrer, Esa Tikkanen even played on that team. I mean, we're talking about like numerous Hall of Famers, and it's just the team was. They were both expansion teams. They both came in with a cluster of guys they picked off the rest of the league, and then they went in two totally different directions. Vegas was all in on trades and weaponizing cap space, which was not an issue in 1985. Like some of the comparisons just can't be done. And in some ways, I found this was an interesting way to compare the actual eras. What did it take to build a successful team? But ultimately, my takeaway was the same as it's been from all of the other ones I've done in this series, dating back to 2020. There are as many ways to build a champion as there are champions. It's just
Good point,
different ways
Bruce.
of doing it, and there's no sort of one true formula. And it's interesting to say, hey, look, this team did it this way, this team did it that way. Which is better? I don't know, but it's kind of interesting to see the different ways they went about it. And so this one, I always wanted to apply this back to the early Oilers, and the Vegas winning as an expansion team gave me the excuse to do this.
Yeah.
This was a personal fun project. It's this, This was 1985. Was kind of my wheelhouse as a fan. I don't very often talk about it, really.
You know, it's such a good point, because when a team wins the cup, you'll often get people going on social media and say, that's how you do it. Draft and development. The Oilers are terrible at draft and development. They got to get into draft and development. And then the same person 5 years later, and it's often the same person who has this kind of emphatic, I'm right response, probably me. But anyway, other people like me as well. It's like 5 years later, yeah, you have to be super aggressive and make trades. You can't wait around for your draft picks to develop into players. You got to get on this. You got to move players. You got to be ruthless. That's the new idea in hockey. You've got to be ruthless, like Las Vegas.
Like
and it's just
Kelly
it's
McCrimmon. He was ruthless and has been ruthless.
Yeah, but Bruce, what you said, that's you got it. You nailed it. There are as many ways to build a Stanley Cup championship team as there are Stanley Cup champions. They're all built differently. And, you know, back for a while there was, well, McDavid has got to win a cup in the first 3 years. And if he doesn't, all is lost, right? Because you have this entry level window, and that's when, and we all were going on about that. And then it's like a different idea and a different idea. And it's like, just listen, there's different ways to do it. And we'll see. You know what we're hoping on now is the kind of the Washington Capitals method of winning the Stanley Cup, or the old Pittsburgh Penguins. You know, you get the superstar, and it's going to take a while, but slowly you build a team around him, and then you eventually win. That's what we're kind of hoping for now.
Yeah. Well, the 2020 and 21 Bolts, their power was great drafting on day 2 of the draft, where they got guys like Kucherov, Point. Cirelli, Killorn, Palat, fantastic players that they got on day 2 of the draft. Then the 22 champions, Colorado Avalanche, had exactly 0 players from day 2 of the draft, not a single one. All their draft choices were like top 10 first round picks, not that different from the Oilers.
McCarr, McKinnon, Rantanen, Landeskog.
Yeah, Byram. And nothing after that, because they traded a bunch of second round picks, or players they picked with second round picks. And then this year we have Vegas with 1 draft pick period, no first rounders, and 1 third pairing defenseman, and yet they found a different way to make it work. And that's the fascinating part of this comparison is there's no one true formula, but what did these teams do, and maybe how lucky did they get? What broke right for them that helped them win? Because there's always some of that.
Yeah. Yeah. There's no one truth, except that there is no one truth. All right, Bruce.
That's the one truth.
That is the one truth. There's only one truth, and that is that there's no one truth.
Yeah, gotcha.
That is the philosophy of Polish philosopher, I think his name is Witold Wybczynski. No, Korzybski. Great political philosopher. All right, Bruce, let's move on.
Yep.
Thanks for talking today.
Yep. All right. Thanks, David. Thanks for listening, everyone.
And in the meantime, and in between times, this has been another edition of the Cult of Hockey podcast.